Okay, am I live? All right, can you all hear me? Okay, let's see. Let me see here. Okay. If you all are in on the chat, let me know if you guys can see me and hear me. Okay, that's new. I haven't had that happen before. All right, let's keep going.
And I just want to say in those cases, well, hey, look, I agree with you, Protestant, that this prayer is wrong. Now what? That doesn't really do anything to move the needle for me. We have to talk about.
I know this happened to GothX earlier today, so.
What is authoritative. And even what I'll hear White doing is, even when he tries to move in the right direction and maybe talk about the Pope, he'll then appeal to things that are non-magisterial from the Pope, something that the Pope said off the cuff or something like that. So I think that there is often in these discussions a misunderstanding on how Catholic authority works that they're just missing. And so most of their arguments, they really just don't land with a Catholic who understands authority.
Right, exactly.
Hey friends, do you want others to discover why the Catholic Church is the church that Jesus established? And do you want to help people make sense of all the confusion in the Catholic Church today? Help contribute to this mission by supporting Reason and Theology at patreon.com/Reason and Theology. By doing so, you'll also get access to exclusive content for patrons only. Also, if you want to deepen your faith, there are free ebooks and even courses that you can sign up for by visiting Reason.
So I have a video planned. It was actually going to be tonight's video if something else hadn't come up, where I want to go with Ibarra's video on why he left Reason and Theology.
.podia.com. Are you a Catholic thinking about converting to Eastern?
Introducing the hide and seek.
Ooh, the delay on this is bad right now. Oh well. Okay, let's get to it. Come on. Skip that. Woo!
Simon Peter is a prominent figure in the New Testament. His prominence has always seemed to be a bit of a contradiction to me. He's rash and impetuous and famously denied knowing Jesus, but at the same time performs miracles and goes on to be a very dedicated missionary. So how do we cut through the legendary accounts of him to understand who Peter really was? And given his importance, why would early Christian writers continue to portray him in a less than stellar light? Join us this week on Misquoting Jesus to find out.
Music. Let's stop the music.
Welcome.
You know, they do have a little banter. Let's skip ahead of the banter. You want to hear the banter? Just subscribe to it.
No, I know. Yeah, I get it. I'm a hard grader too, but there's nobody above me to make me change.
And you've taught them, so you know what they should know. So I feel like it's a little legendary material. Raising people and fish from the dead, for example.
By Peter, and so we have to evaluate those claims. He's a major figure in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He's also mentioned by Paul. Paul actually knew.
So again, Catholics' claim on Peter is that he's the first pope. He's also the founder of Antioch and Rome. He's a co-founder of Rome with Paul, but they are founders by martyrdom. I know there are some different claims out there, but I haven't heard any convincing one. All right.
Knew him and spent time with him and had some disagreements with him. And one big question is how deeply these disagreements went, because they're very different people with very different backgrounds and very different sets of assumptions. But apart from the Gospels and Paul, those are our main sources of historical information. We have a number of writings that claim to have been written by Peter, and so we have to evaluate those claims. Is it probable or even possible that Peter did write them? And there are later traditions, including a very interesting book from the 2nd century, which is called the Acts of Peter, which describes Peter.
So I don't know why I don't enjoy it when Bart Ehrman goes to the Gnostic text for references. The whole claim of the early epistles and the early gospels is the fact that they're so near the time of Jesus that they have a chance of being accurate. And yes, I do see the stuttering that's going on. I don't know what's going on with the program. But anyway, so I'm not exactly sure why Ehrman always does that. Just stick to the best material. Why go for the stuff that he knows is fallacious?
There's missionary activities converting people after Jesus' death. A highly legendary account that includes some material that people would be familiar with, including his execution, being crucified upside down. That's a very interesting story, and another interesting.
Yeah, that's actually very important when it comes to symbology. A lot of Protestants don't understand that in horror movies, you're using Catholic symbols for the horror movies. The pentagram, the upside down cross, the sideways cross, none of that's evil. So when people are trying to be controversial and they have the upside down cross as a tattoo, all you're doing is you have a tattoo of the cross of Peter or the cross of Andrew. You're not actually being controversial.
Interesting stories that people might have some familiarity with.
So when we have so many legendary accounts, and even accounts that are not wholly legendary but contain legendary material, raising people and fish from the dead, for example, is having a legendary act enough to automatically discredit everything else contained in a source?
And the miracles of the apostles don't have to be legendary. I mean, there's modern miracle workers today. So, there can be other explanations. There's more to it than just that. So I do think it's the fact that prophecy and miracles get just dismissed as claims in when looking at the Bible, but you don't dismiss these in other books of other books of antiquity. It just seems like a shame. Like there can be explanations, there can be other stuff. Ooh, there's glitching going on too.
Source all other information.
Oh no, absolutely not. And there are a lot of people who get this one wrong, I'm afraid, especially today. For some reason, people think that if you've got an account of somebody that is filled with legendary materials, therefore you can't know anything about them. And it's like saying, well, if Abraham Lincoln didn't really walk on the ceiling, upside down, and leave his footprints up there, or if he didn't really follow this woman to give her back her change for miles, and if that didn't really happen, then there was no Abraham Lincoln. We don't know.
Yeah, if he didn't cut down the what is it, the apple tree, and then tell the truth because he couldn't tell a lie. Yeah.
Anything about him. No, it doesn't work that way. Sources of information, especially from the ancient world, are usually filled with material that's not historically correct, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing that's historically correct. There often are things that are historically correct. I think you can certainly say things about the historical Peter based on the Gospels, based on Paul, and I guess I forgot to mention the book of Acts. He's a major figure in the book of Acts, the first 12 chapters especially. And so these do contain materials that almost anybody's going to look at and say, yeah, that didn't happen. Now, not so much in the New Testament. People who believe in the New Testament would say, oh, that definitely happened. It's in the New Testament. It happened. But once you get outside the New Testament and start reading the things that Peter allegedly did and the things he allegedly wrote, almost everybody's going to say, yeah, no, that didn't happen.
So in the same sense, the absence of resurrections and miraculous healing doesn't therefore make a source inherently trustworthy. How do historians distinguish between?
I would say those claims don't make it inherently untrustworthy.
non-legendary but implausible reports.
By the way, I love her hair. This right here, when I used to have it, used to be blue. Used to have blue hair for years.
Something that's more likely to be historical fact.
Well, we treat Peter and Jesus and everyone else that we're concerned with who are interested in Christian history the way we treat anybody in any historical source whatsoever. And historians have to try and analyze accounts in order to distinguish what probably happened and what probably did not, whether you're talking about Alexander the Great or Peter. And so the criteria are not distinct for Christian figures. They're the same kinds of criteria. There are some accounts that have all the earmarks of being non-historical, including, for example, the one that you referred to that people may not know. In the Acts of Peter, at one point, Peter raises a fish from the dead. So he's preaching to these crowds, and he's trying to convince them that Jesus is the Messiah, and they're not buying it. And he's standing by a body of water, and there's a tuna fish hanging in a fishmonger shop behind him, smoked tuna. And he says, well, if I bring this tuna fish back to life, will you believe me then that Jesus is the Son of God? Oh, yeah, we'd believe you then, Peter. So he goes over.
When I read through and skimmed through the Gnostic texts, for some reason, that one doesn't stick out to me. The Gnostic texts are really forgettable. I know that probably disappoints a lot of esoteric types that are out there. We were going to do some more controversial videos this week, but since I already did one controversial one, I'm saving the good stuff for next week.
Grabs his tuna, takes it off its hook, throws it in the water, and commands it in the name of the Lord Jesus to come to life, and it comes to life, and it stays alive, and it's alive now, and they all convert. So did that happen? Yeah, I don't think so. And so you get obvious things like that. But
again, that's really late stuff. Like, let's talk about what's in the gospel. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Let's jump ahead by a minute.
Aramaic speaking, uneducated, lower class fisherman from Galilee. Does it make sense that he wrote lengthy epistles in high level, rhetorically effective Greek? Well, if you think it makes sense, you better explain it, because on the surface of it, it doesn't make sense. And so,
again, I don't like this argument because it's very possible that you could learn. There's plenty of slaves that I got actually up on this shelf up here who learned high functional Greek, and I think even one of them high functional Latin, after being a slave, after being functionally illiterate in a culture. And again, how functionally illiterate? Like, he still would have to be able to recite the Shema. He'd still have to be able to recite certain scripture in Hebrew for his bar mitzvah and other stuff like that. So how illiterate? You know what I'm saying?
So that's where the arguments are about, like, what seems within the realm of possibility, what might be right, and like what doesn't seem. And so you have gradations of probability.
So as with many topics that we talk about, and regular listeners won't be surprised by this at all, there are discrepancies between the different books of the New Testament when it comes to details about the life of Peter. Could you tell us about maybe the different stories around how he became a disciple and when he first realized Jesus was the Messiah?
Oh, yeah. We mentioned this briefly in our previous podcast, and it's worth mentioning again, because I can go into a little bit more depth, because the Gospels themselves, of course, tell lots of stories about Peter. And it's not, sometimes you can get like two accounts that's really just completely seem to be at odds. And sometimes you get things that are kind of complicated. Like, here's an interesting complicated one. It's just a little trivial thing, but it's kind of interesting. In all the Gospels, Peter denies Jesus 3 times. So in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus at the Last Supper tells Peter that he says, tonight, before the cock crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And then it happens. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus at the Last Supper is talking to Peter, and he says, before the cock crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times. Okay. Is it before the cock crows or before it crows the second time?
So I've never understood why that's a contradiction. So I got multiple accounts of one of my personal heroes is Alexander the Great. I got multiple accounts of his life. Let's pretend that these are gospels. So I have Rufus, I have Plutarch, I have, it's not Xenophon, who's the other one? I got 4 of them. And then I have a modern one, okay? All these 4 accounts are claiming to be historical. They're claiming to tell you the real truth of Alexander the Great. And they're very interesting, but they're from different time periods, they're from different eras, and they have different understandings. One of them's written by a military guy, one of them's written by a poet, one of them's written by a biographer. So they all have different flavors to them. But I wouldn't be looking at them and thinking that they're contradicting each other. I just think they're giving me a more rounded understanding from a different perspective. So I've never understood why, when we look at the Gospels, Protestants and atheists who come from Protestantism focus on that being a contradiction. They're different perspectives from different authors. I don't see why that's controversial.
So when I was in college, I bought a book that was called The Life of Christ in Stereo. And it should have been quadrasound, should have been Life of Christ in quadrasound, because the idea is you get these 4 gospels that are all kind of, and you need all 4 of them to get the quality of the sound. And so you take them all. And so what this author did is he took the 4 gospels and he put them together into a unified gospel, and to show kind of the unity of the gospel story. And in this account, Peter denies Jesus 6 times. 3 times before the cock crows, and 3 more before it crows twice. Okay, good, interesting, yeah. So you get stuff like that. There are little things, but then you have big things like what you're asking. How did Peter become Jesus' disciple? Well, if you read Mark, you get one answer, and if you read John, you get another. In Mark's gospel, Peter is completely, just this unknown figure, and he's out fishing. And Jesus, after he's baptized, is walking along the Sea of Galilee, and he sees Peter and his brother Andrew. By the way, his name is Simon Peter. Peter is the nickname that Jesus gives him. So he sees Simon and Andrew fishing, and he calls them, says, "Come and be my followers." And they drop their nets and they follow him. Boom.
By the way, I love that version of the story. But to me, as a Catholic and a Christian, it just sounds to me like it's 2 different traditions on how this guy became a prominent figure in the Catholic Church, Christian Church, for the Protestants playing at home.
Just like that, just out of the blue.
I'm convinced.
Yeah, well, I mean, and Mark is trying to show that Jesus, when Jesus speaks, he speaks with authority, and people do what he says. Follow me, they follow him. He commands demons, they come out. Tells people to rise from the dead, they rise from the dead. He has all of this authority in his speech, and so that's Mark's call of Peter. When you get to the Gospel of John, it's not that at all. There's nothing about that.
Yeah, but John's written way after the fact by someone who has a developed Christology. So, of course, he's focusing on different things. John's completely different than the other 3, than the synoptics.
The fishing expedition, or
why wouldn't you expect that?
Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men kind of thing. Peter, Simon, and Andrew they're followers of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist sees Jesus and says, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." And Simon goes up to Jesus, and starts talking to him, and so he approaches Jesus because John the Baptist mentioned him, and so he decides to follow Jesus. And right off the bat, in John, Jesus says something, and Peter says, "You are the Messiah." This is in chapter 1. And in Mark's gospel, you don't get Peter saying that you're the Messiah until halfway through the ministry, and at that point, he still doesn't understand what he's talking about. And so, it's they're very different portrayals. And so if you're a historian, you could ask, is Mark's account of the call of disciples, is that how Peter became the disciple, or is John's account correct? And your options are that Mark is correct, John's wrong, John's correct and Mark's wrong, or they're both wrong.
Why can't they both be correct? Why can't they both be given relatable information about an actual event that has two different traditions about how it actually happened? But you can color it in and figure things out from there. So different perspectives.
In other words, it might not have been either one of those, but it's hard to see how it could be both because they're different from each other.
So what things then do the sources agree on?
It is possible for many improbable things to happen.
And can historians really say anything at all about this man with any degree of confidence?
Yeah, I think we can say some things. So I have a book actually. This is the only book I ever wrote that I wrote because I wanted to use the title. I had the title before the book. The book is called Peter, Paul, and Mary Magdalene. And so I have 6 chapters on Peter in this book. The first 6 chapters are on Peter, about the sources and what we can say historically, and then a lot of the legendary stuff that's really, really interesting. So I think we can say things historically because we have multiple witnesses that are independent of each other that provide us with information, and there's a lot of coherence among these sources, and there's some things in them that wouldn't be the sort of thing somebody would have any reason to make up, so far as we can tell. So, there certainly was a Peter. He certainly was one of Jesus' followers. He probably was.
There's some technical difficulty going on with StreamYard right now and its interface with YouTube. GothX was having trouble, I think, earlier today with the live stream. I've been having glitching on the secondary screen, not on the main monitor, but on the one that's able to show me what's going on. I will turn up the volume as much as I can, but okay.
One of his, if not the first follower of Jesus. He was almost certainly from Galilee, which meant that he spoke Aramaic. He was a fisherman, which is a lower class occupation, completely a hand-to-mouth kind of job, eking out an existence. He followed Jesus around during his ministry. He appears to be Jesus' right-hand man. And so, there are a number of things like that we can say about him during his life. Afterwards, it's pretty clear that he became the leader of the church right after Jesus' death, but eventually he was replaced in that role by James, the brother of Jesus.
So I disagree with that. I don't think that he was ever replaced. He kept the place of honor.
And Peter himself appears to have gone on missionary journeys, because Paul talks about Peter as a missionary. But Paul considers him to be one of the 3 main figures in the Jerusalem church years after Jesus' death. And so anyway, so there are a range of things that we can say, I think, historically about this person. He almost certainly believed that Jesus got raised from the dead. And Paul indicates that he was the first one to see Jesus after his death. And so I think with some plausibility, we can say.
I would say that James became the most important guy in Jerusalem after Peter left Jerusalem. And I would say that after James' martyrdom, Peter's ascendancy continues to rise. And even after his martyrdom, his ascendancy continues to rise, which is interesting how that works.
That Peter,
Julius Caesar can say something about that too.
Probably had some kind of visionary experience after Jesus' death where he thought that Jesus had come back to life, and he may have been the first to have that experience, possibly.
Now, you've said that Paul knew Peter and writes about him in his letters. What reasons do we have for thinking that he and Paul did not get along terribly well?
Yeah, because of Paul's letters, mainly because there's a particular incident that I'm going to be going to a greater length in this course I'm doing. Did Peter hate Paul? But for now, I can just kind of summarize the basic situation. Paul indicates in the book of Galatians, where he's talking to Christians in the region of Galatia, which would be, if you imagine Turkey today and you go to the center, it'd be like north, south, central was the area of Galatia. It was a region. It wasn't a city, with lots of churches, and Paul had converted people there and started churches in some of those cities. And he's writing back to them in the letter to the Galatians to explain to them that salvation comes only by believing in Jesus' death, not by keeping the Jewish law. And this is important to him because there are other missionaries who have come, not Peter, but other missionaries have come to say, no, you have to keep the law. If you're a Gentile, you need to get circumcised if you're a man, and you need to start following the Jewish laws of kosher and Sabbath. God's the God of the Jews. And if you're going to worship the Messiah of the Jews, you need to be a Jew. And so and so Paul disagrees with that view. But in the context of talking about his disagreement and how he thinks this is a horrible idea, he tries to show that the other apostles before him, especially Peter, James, and John, agree with him on this point. And that he actually went to Jerusalem and he met with Peter for a couple weeks, and that Peter was on board about this. But at a later point, Paul relates, he and Peter were together in the city of Antioch, and there was a division in the church between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. So there were some Jewish followers of Jesus who thought that if they're going to maintain their Jewishness, they can't be eating meals with Gentiles, because Gentiles eat non-kosher foods, and you can't have your meals together. And it appears that Peter agreed with that group, or came to agree with that group, and Paul thought that was hypocrisy. So it's not that Peter thought that the death of Jesus didn't matter for salvation or anything like that. The death of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, those are essential for salvation, but Jews can maintain their distinctiveness. And Paul thought, no, because if you say that Jews and Gentiles are different in Christ, then Christ doesn't unify his own body, and the body has to be unified. And
okay, so let's go over two different understandings of Peter. The papacy, through successive popes and councils, has always traced its origins and title deeds to the unique commission reported to have been given by Jesus Christ to Peter, the chief or Principus, an imperial title used for him in the late 4th century, and his apostles, later to be martyred at Rome. Information about Peter's career, personality, and standing in the primitive Christian community. I always like it better when they call it the ancient church. The ancient church and then the early church. Is provided by the New Testament, supplemented by ancient reliable tradition. The New Testament accounts come from a variety of sources originating at wildly different dates and colored by the often divergent viewpoints of their authors. But the picture of the apostle which emerges from them is consistent and lifelike. Originally named Simon or Simeon. In Greek, he was a native of Bethesda, a village on the Sea of Galilee, son of Jonas, according to Matthew 16:17, and with his brother Andrew was a fisherman. When Jesus began his mission, Simon was martyred and lived in Capernaum with his mother-in-law and Andrew. According to the Synoptic Gospels, it was by the Sea of Galilee that Jesus summoned the two brothers, James and John, and followed him. St. John's Gospel, which places the call in Judea, represents the earliest disciples, including Simon, as having previously been disciples of John the Baptist. So that's an interesting little note there. All four Gospels agree with minor differences of emphasis that from then onward, Simon was the leader and spokesman of the group. He is recognized as such by the Lord. So Peter is the leader of the apostles even in the Bible. He is mentioned with conspicuous frequency, appears first in all the list of the 12, and belongs to the inner group that are very close to Jesus, especially at the events of the raising of Jairus' daughter, the transfiguration, the agony in the gospel. Let's see. Let's see. Jesus pronounced him to be blessed because of his inspired insight, bestowed on him the Aramaic name Cephas, or Caiaphas, meaning rock, rendered Peter in Greek, and declared that he would build his indestructible church on this rock and would give him the keys of the kingdom of heaven and the powers to bind and loose. At the Last Supper, Jesus charged Peter to strengthen his brothers. This is at Luke 22:32. Warm-hearted and impetuous, he was rebuked by Jesus because after confessing his messiahship, he refused to accept the necessity of his rejection and death. That would be it at Mark 8:31-33. When Jesus was arrested, his courage failed him, and he thrice denied Jesus. Nevertheless, he was the first disciple to enter the empty tomb, and the first whom the risen Lord showed himself. Depending on the story you're reading. Let's see. Peter 3 times received from the Lord the pastoral charge, feed your sheep, which there's some parallel there that he denies him 3 times, and yet the Lord encourages him 3 times. It could have been the writer's way of showing that no matter how much denial Peter might have given, that Peter was going to be predestined to be the leader no matter what. It could have been showing some other things. The first half of Acts discloses that after the ascension, through his relationship to James, the Lord's brother, remains unclear. Peter was the undisputed leader of the youthful church. It was he who presided over the choice of a successor to Judas, who explained to the crowd the meaning of Pentecost, and who healed the lame beggar in the temple. He's the one who pronounced sentence on Aeneas and Seraphia, and who opened the church to the Gentiles by having Cornelius baptized without undergoing circumcision. So don't give Paul that credit. It is Peter. Okay, there's some other stuff here, but you kind of get the idea. Let's see. As it says, Peter was a missionary. Let's get to some of the other information that you might not have from the Bible. Peter spent his last few years in Rome. While the New Testament is silent about it, you can clearly see it when talking about Babylon. There are strong inferences in the Gospel of Mark. Early writers such as Clement and Ignatius and Irenaeus have all said that he died in Rome. Nothing is known of the length of his residency there. The story is it lasted 25 years. Ignatius assumed that Peter and Paul wielded authority over the Roman Church, while Irenaeus claimed that they jointly founded it and inaugurated its succession in bishops. By the way, there's female, not bishoprics, deaconesses. There's female deaconesses there in Rome running a church before Peter and Paul get there, just FYI. Nothing, however, is known of their roles. Both were executed according to the historian Eusebius in Nero's reign, probably during the persecution of 64. Tertullian reports that Peter was crucified, a fact already known to the fourth gospel. So in the Gospel of John, they already say how he dies. So when John was written, Peter was already crucified. So with anyone trying to say that John was an eyewitness, just be aware. Timing might not line up as like you might want it to. There are 2 burial sites that are supposed to be his. There's one that's recognized by the Catholic Church and one that is recognized by the Protestants. Let's see. Let me see what else. Anything else that's interesting here? Two epistles. Yeah, okay. All right. And there's a bunch of citations down here, but you can figure that out for yourselves. All right. Let's check out another summary, shall we? By the way, after Peter, the next pope is Clytus, Anacletus, and then Clement the First. Sometimes Clement is thought to be the first one we have evidence for. Other times it's another one. But let's go here. Peter was Jesus' chief apostle, whom Catholic tradition regards as the first pope. Peter was born in a village in Bethesda on the Sea of Galilee. He's on the first of all succession list. He identifies Linus, not Peter. Okay. The first succession list, however, identifies Linus, not Peter, as the first pope. Peter was not regarded as the first bishop of Rome until the late 2nd century. Peter's original Hebrew name, Simon, rendered in Greek Simon, was also rendered as Simeon. Twice in the New Testament, Acts and Peter, Jesus gives him a new name, the Aramaic word kappa, later transliterated into Cephas into Greek. But the name Cephas appears only 9 times in the New Testament, once in John, 8 times in the letters of Paul. The name Peter is a Greek translation of the Aramaic kappa. Okay, now they're just repeating themselves. Peter was married and remained so even after becoming a disciple of Jesus. It is clear from his account of Jesus' healing of Peter's mother-in-law and from Peter's references to the fact that Peter and the other apostles Paul's references that Peter and the other apostles took their wives along with them on their apostolic journeys. The pious belief that the apostles, including Peter, put away their wives once they received the calling from Jesus has no historical basis whatsoever. Rather, it arises from the mistaken and essentially unchristian assumption that celibacy is more virtuous than marriage because of sexual intimacy. Peter's role in the church, Catholic tradition has regarded Peter as the first pope because of the special commission he received from Jesus Christ and because of the unique status he enjoyed and the central role he played within the college of the 12 apostles. He's the first disciple to be called by Jesus. He's the spokesman for the others. And according to tradition, Paul and Luke, he was the first that the Lord appeared to after his resurrection. Mary Magdalene is the primary witness to the resurrection of the tradition of Matthew, John, and the Marcion appendix. But even in Mark, the angel of the tomb instructs Mary Magdalene and the other women to go tell the disciples, and then they point out and single out and tell Peter. Peter is, in fact, the most frequently commissioned of the 12 following the resurrection. He is also the most frequently mentioned. He's always listed first among the 12. This later point, alongside with others, particularly significant because in the ancient world, respect and authority always came in the first to be named on a line, the firstborn, etc., etc. He is prominent in the original Jerusalem community, described by Paul as one of its pillars in Galatians. He's well known in many other churches. Let's see. It was Peter who took a decisive step in ordering the commission of a baptism of the Gentile Cornelius without first requiring circumcision. That's in Acts 10. Although Paul spoke of Jesus' ministry as being directed to the circumcised, Peter's influence on Gentile arenas is nevertheless obvious. On the other hand, his role was not always so singular. He often shares his position of prominence with James and John, consulting with them in the manner of inner elite issues among the 12. All three accompanied Jesus to the rising of Jairus' daughter, the Transfiguration, the Mount of Olives, the special farewell, and the Garden of Gethsemane. Peter's activities are not reported following the Council of Jerusalem, where he exercised an important, although not necessarily papal, in quotes, role in opening the mission of the church to the Gentiles. That's in Acts 15, 7-12. Significantly, it was James, not Peter, who presided over the council and ratified its decision. However, there is increasing agreement among historians and biblical scholars that Peter did go to Rome and was martyred there by crucifixion, according to the North African theologian Tertullian. The Roman leader Clement, regarded as the third pope, describes Peter's trial in Rome in 1 Clement 5:4. And Eusebius of Caesarea also gives the report. St. Irenaeus of Lyon assumes that Peter and Paul jointly founded the church at Rome and inaugurated its succession of bishops. However, there is no evidence that before his death, Peter actually served at the Church of Rome as the first bishop, even though the fact is regularly taken for granted. Okay, and then let's get to the stuff that nobody knows if it's correct or not correct. Let's see. There are many long lists of popes following Peter, beginning with Linus and continuing to the 21st century. Okay. At least two of the apostolic rows, Peter could not have had successors. First, at the tradition of the co-founder with Paul, the Apostolic See of Rome. The second is one of the 12 who were personal witnesses to the risen Lord. These are unique and not repeatable and not transmittable. The popes do not succeed Peter in the sense of replacing him, but they continue in his chair. Indeed, St. Camprian of Carthage, every bishop has his own episcopal see or diocese, in the same sense, a successor of Peter. Nevertheless, it is a matter of Catholic doctrine that the Petrine succession, like apostolic succession, is a development guided by the Holy Spirit. According to Catholic tradition, this ministry of the Bishop of Rome exercises the capacity of Vicar of Peter. Notice, not Vicar of Christ, Vicar of Peter. But anyway. Let's see. Strengthen your brothers, first among equals. So, yeah. Okay, let's continue.
Keeping the law, sure, that's fine if you're a Jew, but you shouldn't impose it on others, and you shouldn't do it to the extent of breaking apart the body of Christ. And so they had a falling out, and it might not sound like a significant thing to us.
Now, I want to be clear that from Eusebius, you get a different justification for calling Peter the first pope. So Peter is the first pope because of his prominence, but both Peter and Paul get their listing as the founders of the church in Rome because of their martyrdom, because their blood literally soaked the ground for the seeds of faith to grow in Rome. So that's the argument, just to be clear, from Eusebius, and I like that argument a little bit better than what was presented here in these two biographies I just read.
But Paul was really quite vehement about it. And
Sandals, I know one of my other viewers had the opposite problem, so I turned the volume up on the audio from the stream. I know that changes the sound, but I have to choose. So.
And there's no indication that they ever made up. They apparently had a public argument about it, and. Oh. Yeah, Paul reports the argument. Paul only reports his side of the argument. And he never says, yeah, and everybody there agreed with me. So like he just reports it, and then like it's one of these one-liners that ends the conversation. And so I guess he wants you to think, yeah, so I came out on top of that one, but we don't hear the other side. that group is because it's the group that lost. And so there were other groups that thought that Paul was the one who really understood the Christian message and that Peter got it completely wrong, Peter and the other apostles. That was a view that was very popular in parts of second century Christianity, where there were churches established by a teacher named Marcion, who thought that the apostles, especially Peter, got everything wrong, and that Paul was called to be an apostle precisely because none of the others got it, and God had to start all over again with a new apostle. And so Paul's the one who gets it. And so that was a prominent form of Christianity that in some parts of Christendom in the second century was the majority view in parts of Christendom. But eventually the view emerged, of course, that Peter and Paul were on the same page. And that affected many of our writings, not just the book of Acts, but many of our other writings as well, that try to show that there's simpatico.
So given how important Peter came to be in the foundation of Christianity, is it surprising that he continued to be depicted by writers as this kind of rash, impetuous peasant?
Okay, so now they're starting to move away from the historical account, so I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next video, which will be on a similar topic.
Rev up your metabolism.
We're talking authority today, boys. Oh, here we go. This might be something different.
Talk today about the concept of the sense of reality, which we find in the writings of the psychologist and philosopher William James, based on his book, The Varieties of Religious Experiences, which is a really nice and easy read, about 500 pages, so it's long, but it's a fast read, that was based on a series of lectures that William James gave in Harvard in 1901 and 1902. Actually, the talks were scheduled to be given a couple of years earlier, but some health problems got in the way of James delivering them. But by the time he delivered them, it became clear to him and his audience that he had stumbled upon a pretty original way of thinking about religion that deserved to be published as a book. And so what you get here are these lectures that are written with a live audience in mind. So it makes them very digestible, very easy to follow, but they still have a good amount of philosophically important content. And the concept that I want to focus on today is James's notion of the sense of reality, which he believes is at the root of our religious experiences.
So I would think that that's true. I know that when I was wrestling with religion before I came back to the church, I was concentrating mostly on ultimate reality, on what the actual true experience was. Just to give you an idea, let's say you're touching a cap, you're not really getting this. Your skin might be touching this, but you don't know that. What you're actually getting is you're getting signals from your nerves, and that's what's telling you, and it's your processing that's telling you this is real. If you can interrupt the signal or put a different signal into your mind, there goes your ability to know what's real or what's not. This is one of the dangers with the newer, better VR that's coming up and AR that's coming out through Apple. So just be aware. Once you start messing with your senses, you're messing with your ability to perceive actual reality.
Independently of what variety of religious experience we're talking about. But before I talk about that concept, we have to do a little bit of build up in terms of understanding what is going on in this book. So the first thing to note is that William James is a psychologist.
Sound a little bit better with
he studied medicine. He spent some time even in Brazil studying natural history. So he has the mind of a scientist first and foremost, and a scientist with a very clearly empirical orientation. And that is going to be reflected in his approach to psychology. Now, his interest here is on religious experiences as a lived phenomenon. So he's not interested in religious dogma or scriptural interpretation or organized religion. And he makes it very clear that what draws him.
I wonder if we'd now call it spirituality in the current. I wonder if we'd just call it spirituality instead of religion nowadays.
to the subject of religion is the way in which people live their experiences of the divine. And so he begins the book by positioning himself between two different currents of thought that he sees as dominating religious studies and that he believes we need to move away from in order to give a coherent account of religious experience in all of its varieties. Now, the first of those traditions is what he calls medical materialism. And medical materialism is just the idea, quite common at the end of the 19th century, that if somebody has a certain belief, it must be correlated and maybe even caused by some organic underlying principle that can be traced to the brain or to the nervous system. So there's got to
So that's what I was just talking about. Okay. Tactile truth.
be an organic explanation for the way of thinking that we find in that person. So, for example, if somebody believes in God, maybe there's something going on in a particular part of the brain, or maybe some neural connection is not happening in the way that it should, or maybe there is an unnecessary growth in some part of the nervous system.
So the only problem with that default is the fact that most people believe in God. So you'd be saying that what is a normal development is somehow abnormal. So that's an incorrect assumption. It would be the normal default for the human brain to perceive religiosity, because it is the common default.
Whatever explanation you want to insert here, medical materialism always looks for a organic explanation for beliefs and attitudes that might influence people's worldview. And
this could also be naturalism, modern Wiccanism. I do want to go back and watch the Wiccan video I did, which was not very popular. I do want to go back and watch her again because she did cover some more meditative magic.
According to James, there are two main problems with medical materialism. The first one is that it delegitimizes the experiences that it seeks to explain because it just tries to reduce them to an anatomical or
it's naturalism. That's all that it is. Naturalism disguised in philosophical language.
Physiological explanation rooted in whatever the latest medical understanding of the relationship between mind and body might be.
So you could actually say that Jordan Peterson is probably guilty of this as a heresy, where he's trying to psychoanalyze. Like he's trying to make it a psychological experience. He's trying to make religion a psychoanalytical experience instead of it being a purely religious or metaphysical experience. If you watch Jay Dyer is more interested in religion as metaphysical truth than he is in religion as natural truth. In fact, he'll actually actively deny natural truth sometimes, aside from being kind of a jerk about things.
First problem, that it's not respectful to the irreducibility of various experiences that we have and that carry meaning for us independently of whatever their origin might be. The second problem of medical materialism is that it is, in a sense, a self-defeating position, because if you believe that beliefs are always caused or can be traced back to an organic origin, then in order for you to be consistent about that claim, you have to also accept that your own belief that beliefs are organically caused is itself organically caused. And so he tries to get medical...
Yeah, you're adding an extra barrier between you and the divine that doesn't need to be there.
Materialism in a double bind or in a contradiction, because of course most people who defend medical materialism would say that about the beliefs of other people, but they would not feel so comfortable saying that their own philosophical and theoretical position is ultimately reducible to maybe hyperactivity in some part of their right or left hemisphere. And so medical materialism for James is one of those currents that is dominating, especially empirical psychology in the 19th century, and that we need to move away from.
So unfortunately, my chat is not showing up whatever's going wrong with the program. But I do have a screen set up. So Sandal said, so if it takes me a while for me to respond to you guys, that's why I'm waiting for it to actually show up in the actual video. Naturalism can have weird, crazy stuff too, but it comes more boring. But it becomes more boring with naturalism. I agree. When you take out the mystical and you try to ground mysticism in not just reality, but in naturalism, it takes the magic away. I mean, just put it in plain English, but it takes what makes it special, the uniqueness of it, away. So, yeah.
If we want to understand, and this is the key point, if we want,
and naturalism can bleed into relativism, which can bleed into subjectivity, which then turns into no moral boundaries, no objective truth. So it's its own slippery slope.
Want to understand what religion means to the individuals who organize their lives around it. Now, the second current that James tells us we need to move away from in thinking about religious experience is what he calls dogmatic theology.
Okay, so now we're getting closer to the Catholic way of thinking.
And you can think of dogmatic theology quite simply as organized religion or as the position of...
So a lot of the big dark magisterium types are really against dogmatic theology and dogmatic thinking. What is it? Data over dogma, that kind of thing. So I'm personally, if the church fathers rule on something, I'm going to side with the church fathers. So that's me.
People who believe in the truth of whatever religious dogma they embrace. And so he says, look, I'm not going to adopt medical materialism because I think that's reductive and does not do justice to the complexity of the phenomenon of lived religious experience. But at the same time, I'm not interested in questions of the truth of or falsity of various religious positions, right? I don't care.
Various religious dogma.
If there is or if there isn't free will, if there is one or many worlds, if God is fundamentally good or evil. What I care about is how people incorporate those beliefs into the web of their worldview, really. And so by positioning himself between these two traditions, James adopts what he calls an empiricist criterion for
an empiricist criterion for thinking about religion.
Thinking about religion, where he says, if you want to understand a religious experience, you have to understand it, quote unquote, by its fruits, i.e., by what it actually allows people to do in their everyday lives, by how it changes their relationship to themselves and their relationship to the world. And
so that kind of reminds me of the arguments that I was having with Gurr and I was having with not so much B.S. Lewis, but there was another guest who was very common in Gurr streams who I would have these arguments with. And as I was saying, it's the results, it's the fruits, it's the utility of the religion, not the utility of the political utility or the social utility, but the actual way that it functions in your life that makes it true. If the religion says it's going to have a certain result and you do the thing and you get the result that the religion says it's going to have, and it's the good result that you're looking for, that's a positive. If the book or whatever religion you have says that if you do these things, a negative thing will happen, and the negative thing does happen, there's another proof. That's a negative proof. If, on the other hand, you in a religion where what it says is going to lead to a negative leads to a positive, well, then that's non-conforming. If it says that if you do this, something good will happen and something negative happens, there's another point of contention between you and the religion. So the religion that the positives and the negatives play out the way that it says it will, that shows that the religion is true based on its fruits, which is the argument that I have. I have not read this particular book, so that's not where I got it from, but yeah, that's where I'm kind of at.
And so this is where you already begin to see the very close connection that there is between James's way of thinking about religious experience and the rising program of pragmatism, American pragmatism, a school of thought in philosophy that foregrounds the practical value.
Ooh, am I an American pragmatist? I don't know.
Of things rather than their theoretical property.
This is like reading Vogue when you're in high school or junior high. And they give you the thing like, what kind of person are you? Who are you attracted to? Blah, blah, blah. This is like, what kind of philosopher are you? What's
And
your
so
religious
the notion
flavoring?
that what is important is what works is already in this text. And in fact, in reading this text for the first time, I noticed that William James already uses here the concept of cash value, where he makes an allusion to the fact that what matters about certain ideas is the cash value that they have, i.e. what they actually allow you to do with them. So a pragmatic and
I would say functionality and utility, but cash value is more kind of like what we were talking about yesterday with Lauren Chen and her understanding of Christianity.
empiricist criterion. Now, James talks about religion, and that means that he has to give a definition of what religious experience is. So this is his.
What is a good definition of religious experience? Ooh, that is a good thought. In the chat, if you have a definition for religious experience, go ahead and lay it in there. Religious experience, what would I define it as? A religious experience would be something divine that is outside of your natural, normal understanding of the world, that can be processed through the means you have currently to understand the normal understanding of the world. Yeah.
His definition of religion in this empiricist vein. Religion, therefore, as I now ask you arbitrarily to take it, shall mean for us the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, as far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. End quote. Page 31 of the book. So once again, because there are a couple of things that I want to highlight about this, religion is the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude as far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. And so,
okay, let me read that and then give you my take on it. Okay, so religion, therefore, as I now ask you arbitrarily to take it, shall mean for us the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, as far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. I would say that religious experience is the acts of both the individual and the collective, exclusive collective group, in both their solitude and their communion, in relation to that which is divine or metaphysical, aside from the material world. That's how I would change it. That's my take.
So two observations about this quote is first that it foregrounds the subjective. So it's about feelings, acts, and experiences.
But I would say religion has to have a way to define itself outside of the naturalistic realm. You have to have some kind of divine metaphysical truth for it to be truly religious. Some kind of objective standard outside of your natural normal experiences. Unless you're going to have normal everyday be a religious experience itself.
It's not about religious dogma, and it's not about second order objective explanations from scientists about what's happening in the brain or in the body in the case of people who have religious beliefs. So that's the first thing, the focus on the subjective. The second thing I want to highlight, and here I'm just going to raise it as a question for us to think about, is why James defines religion as these experiences specifically of individual men in their solitude.
So let's not worry about the fact that he says men, because by men he could mean women as well, or humankind. So let's throw that out. Individual men. Well, it has to be an individual experience from his point of view, because each experience is different, and there's going to be a difference. So he's trying to take out outside influence. He doesn't want the corporate religious experience you would have from an organized religion. He's not looking for the federal head. Since Christianity and Catholicism are both communal religions, it would be very hard to find an individualistic religious perspective. In fact, the Pope, in his Syllabus of Errors, labeled American individualism as a heresy, specifically for this reason, because it denies the communal corporate religiosity and spirituality that exists within a group.
And I obviously, I'm not here making the point about gender. I think
and disconnects the individual from the group, which is exactly what Christianity wants to undo. They want their members to be part of the single body of Christ.
He's using the term men problematically as the universal for human. But my interest here is on why he thinks that religious feelings and acts can only happen to people individually in the...
I would argue that spirituality, mystical spiritualism, can be individualistic. But true religious experience requires communal connection.
Context of their solitude. So to what extent might that presuppose a certain view of religion that maybe is less universal than James?
It would be private meditation or private revelation versus liturgy, communal liturgy.
Himself seems to believe. So the focus on solitude here strikes me as potentially subject to critique. But I'll leave that for another time. Now, the third thing I want to mention here is that it's the feelings, acts, and experiences of people in their solitude.
So that makes it, at least for the feelings, that makes it more subjective. I think religious experiences should be somewhat objective. They should be somewhat out of yourself, not within yourself. If it's within yourself, is that really a divine sense?
Insofar as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they consider the divine. And so it's not that he presupposes a conception of divinity or a particular understanding of God. People can have religious experiences in connection to whatever it is that they individually consider the divine. So there is a pluralism here in this definition.
So one of the places where the Dark Magisterium and I disagree with each other, because like I said, I'm dedicated to anti-apologetics just as much as they are. The difference is that I believe in the Holy Spirit. I believe the Holy Spirit can guide the authors of the Bible and inspire a book. So, I do think there is a need for communion. Well, I loved my personal development through meditation. I think there is the necessity of communion and belonging. Yes, hermits are important. Yes, monks in solitude is important. Yes, Holy Hezekiah is important. But it's still important to be part of the group. Not one or the other, not either or, but both and. To be both an individual and part of the group. To both belong and be individualistic at the same time. Not either or.
That is not only consistent with the
a unique voice within the group.
Pragmatic empiricist orientation of the lectures, but that is also welcoming of religious differences. So people with very different belief systems can have religious experiences in this Jamesian sense. Now, in thinking about these feelings and experiences, he recognizes that that's a very broad definition and that it could raise some problems. And so he then offers a couple of clarifications as to what a religious experience in his sense is. And I'll talk about that before I finally conclude by talking about the central concept, which is what he calls the sense of reality. Now, if we just talk about people having certain feelings about the divine, there are many ways in which those feelings can go. Some people can have a very committed relationship to the divine, rooted in faith. Other people could say, well, I've thought about it. I really don't think that there is divinity in the world. I think that's absurd. So maybe for me, divinity is just whatever, like the flying spaghetti monster, or something, insert here something even more ridiculous than that, like, oh, for me religion is my cat. My cat is
I don't know why on both of those I kind of thought that's where he was going to go.
the divine. And so James introduces a clarification where he says, even though my concept is very broad, it requires a couple of things. Number one, it requires seriousness on the part of the subject that is having these experiences. And that's his way of undercutting the possibility of a cynical character suddenly.
See, I don't know if a religious experience has to be serious. I've studied enough Eastern philosophy to think of like the Laughing Buddha. Um, I and I got into an argument with an evangelical fundamentalist and a free grace person as well over this. But I believe God has a sense of humor. I believe that Jesus laughed, told jokes, was able to be sarcastic. Just read the Bible. Just read the Gospels. So I think God does have a sense of humor. So yeah.
Claiming to have religious experiences. So the person that says, my cat is my God, according to James, that's not a position of seriousness, something that you truly, truly believe, and therefore it doesn't count as a religious experience. The second clarification that he adds, and all of this is in the first 100 pages of the book, he says, my understanding of religious experience does not require an actual God. And I think this is a very important point.
So I was going to bring this up earlier in this conversation, which is I think about people who take psilocybin and DMT, and they have religious experience through drug-induced religious experience. They don't suddenly become religious people afterwards. They don't suddenly believe in a God, but they definitely say they've had a religious experience. I know plenty of people who have witnessed spiritual or metaphysical realities, whether it's demons or ghosts, and seeing a demon or a ghost doesn't make them believe in God. It makes them believe in ghosts and demons and maybe even magic, things which I personally deny. I believe in a God, but I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in ghosts, at least not in the television poltergeist sense of the word. Spirit is different, soul is different. Divine energy is different than a movie ghost, put it that way. So while I might not believe in vampires and witches and werewolves and all that, I do believe in a divine truth, a divine essence, divine time travel, divine time, divine God, divine oneness, divine essence. So I believe in absolute. I believe in an absolute reality or an ultimate reality, as I used to say. I think that does necessitate a divine.
Because he says there are systems of thought out there that incorporate a notion of divinity, but that do not presuppose a God.
It's like doing yoga without believing in any of the mantras or tantras or any of the worship. Doing martial arts without the understanding that there is house gods and house deities that they're worshiping, the kami. I think it's called the kami. I can't remember anymore. I don't know. Would you go to church and pray if you didn't believe there was a God? Would you practice the exact same rituals, but not thinking that those rituals were talking to the divine? A religious experience without the divine. Would you do it? I wouldn't.
God, whether that God be inhuman or whether that God be anthropomorphized in one way or another. And he says, two examples of belief systems that are religious in my sense and that I embrace and I want to understand more, but that don't have a deity in the traditional sense, are the writings of Emerson. So there's the American transcendentalists here with their views about nature as itself transcendent and divine would count for him as a naturalistic religion. And so you could have a religious experience being an Emersonian. Another example is Buddhism. According to James, there is no...
Maybe if all people you know would go there too. Maybe if it was communal, but that goes against this particular philosopher's dictum that it should be individual. So if it should be individualistic, why would you do a religious practice if you don't believe in a divinity completely on your own in isolation? You could think of self-worship, maybe humanism. Masturbation as self-worship. You are your own God. Maybe.
Deity in the traditional sense in Buddhist metaphysics. And so here we have another example of a religion without a God. So you do need to be serious, but you don't need to have a God.
What about a type of extreme nihilism where oblivion and chaos is your God, or nothingness is your God? The lack of existence, the opposite of existence is your God.
Finally, and this is the third clarification that he introduces, what you do also need on top of that sense of seriousness is what he calls a higher emotion in the context of the experience. And so
a higher emotion within the context of the experience, a completely individualistic religion that is completely serious, divorced from the divine, and contains a higher emotion. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't agree with this. I'm thinking I'm not a pragmatist. I'm thinking I'm not an American pragmatist. All right, let's see.
So when somebody has a religious experience, he says it has to have this kind of affective fullness to it. The experience really draws you out of
a religious experience from reading a book. A religious experience from eating a mushroom, from eating a really good steak, from eating a really good carrot. A religious experience from repairing your motorcycle. That's a reference, by the way. From reading a poem, from being out in the day, doing a really good breeze, in a field by yourself, no mosquitoes.
Of yourself, and it fills you with a kind of happiness or joy or a sense of being lifted.
Now, why would a higher emotion have to be a positive emotion? What about extreme sadness or grief as a religious experience? In this individualistic, divided or separated isolationist form.
And that means that a religious experience is very different than philosophy. Because in philosophy, he says, You can have uplifting ideas, but they're always purely rational ideas.
Hold on, I'm going to read Sandal's comment. A really good carrot would be a carrot that had only the inside part that is sweeter.
They're ideas that you have to work logically.
Wouldn't that just be a sweet potato cut to look like a carrot? Sandals, do we have a new business that we're about to go into? Are we going to sell carrot-shaped sweet potatoes?
Through, in that require a sense of effort and volition, right? You have to think hard about some of these questions. For instance,
can a carrot be classified as a yam? Oh, we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere, Sandals. I like this. We're going to take over the world with our carrot yams, with our sweet potato carrots, with our sweet yam carrots. No, sweet potato carrots. Our sweet carrots, our carrot potatoes. No, that's not good. Sweet carrots. I think sweet carrots. I think there's something there.
Is there a God? Is there a beginning to time? Is the universe finite or infinite? You can approach these questions philosophically, i.e., through mental effort, but that's very different than what happens in a truly religious experience, which is that the insight that you gain or your conversion to.
See, again, some of the more popular religious experiences from Fatima, from the dancing of the sun, from stuff like that, all those are communal, all those are group experiences, not private individual experiences.
To a certain position fills you with a kind of joy that, as he says, requires no volition and no effort.
Communion itself is the Eucharist. That's a group thing, and that's a group thing that transcends time. You're piercing the veil of time. You're piercing my cat's yawning at me. You're piercing the veil of time, and you're going back to the very first and every single communion and Eucharist since then. I mean, complete membership, complete belonging.
It just takes you over, and it gives you that happy mind or that higher emotion that philosophy will never attain. And so what we have so far then is that we have James with this empiricist approach to religion. It's neither medical materialism nor dogmatic theology that defines it in terms of feelings, actions, and experiences. And that tells us that in order to have the right kind of experience, it needs to be you in a relationship to your conception of the divine in such a way that you are serious and that you have a higher emotion, even if there is no traditional God involved. Although
I think I disagree with this altogether.
There could be. Now, all of this, now to bring it to the concept that interests us, is rooted in his understanding of what he calls a sense of reality. According to James, we all, human beings, we all are born with this sense for the real that, according to him, allows us to navigate the world. It's just part of the architecture of our minds and bodies. It just comes for free with the kinds of beings that we are. Now, this
part of our software
sense of reality typically works together with the senses, with hearing, vision, taste, etc., to construct for us a world of experience, right? So like, this is real right now. I see it, I touch it. So from my senses, I gather information that then my sense of reality infuses with.
But the problem is that your sense of reality could be wrong. Not just unique, like as in, this might be red to me, but it might be burgundy, burgundy to you. This could be brown to me. This could be yellow to you. Like we're not talking about subjectivity here, but the actual color, you might be seeing blue and I'm seeing red, and I would say I'm right. Not just different variations of a gradation.
This solidity that makes that stuff real for me. So think about the sense of reality.
There's something there to be said about understanding who God is with many different religions and many different denominations and perspectives on God, but there's only one true, real God. The problem is that what happens to the cultures where there's multiple gods?
Almost as a kind of power that we have to distinguish between what's real and what's not real. And typically the sense of reality, again, works in close conjunction and in close collaboration with the organs of sense.
In the sanctuary.
The point that then allows James to make a leap from this to religion is that he argues that this sense of reality, or what he calls the sense of objective presence, works with the senses, but is not limited.
See, I do think you need a sense of objective presence. I do think that's right. I do think the shekel in the tabernacle is important. You need a single standard, an objective standard. Even if you yourself are deciding on what that objective standard is, once it's set, you have to maintain it. Otherwise, you have no reality. You have no proper weight, no proper measure. You can't tell growth, you can't tell loss if you don't have a single standard. No, there's something flawed in this approach, in the approach that the philosopher that he's examining is taking.
To the senses. And so there are some cases in which our sense of reality latches onto things, ideas, notions that are not produced by the senses, and then infuses them with this kind of sense of objectivity. And
I would say it infuses them with a sense of meaning, but a sense of objectivity.
Reality, making us experience the thing in question as if it truly is there, as a real part of the universe. And he says, essentially, religious experiences happen whenever concepts.
So is a home the house, or the stuff that's inside, or the family?
Like the concept of God, become the object of our sense of reality, such that our sense of reality is not necessarily working exclusively with the senses. It's suddenly working with something that comes from somewhere else, right? Maybe it comes from tradition, from convention, or from our own intellect. We start thinking about the idea of God, we produce the idea of God, and then our sense of reality latches onto it.
See, I'm thinking about door here. What culture has a different understanding of door? No matter what word you use for it, whatever, it doesn't matter what language you're speaking. A door is a door. What language has a different, what culture has a different understanding of door?
And gives it this sense of the real, such that we experience God or the infinite or the divine as being just as real as this shelf or as these sets of books that I have behind
What's actual ownership if you can't actually own anything?
me? And so the sense of reality really lies at the root of James's understanding of religion, because it is what explains the fervor and the intensity of religious belief. Because, just a few seconds ago, I even used the term, we act as if it's real, as if the concept of God is real. But James would actually criticize that articulation, because people who are religious, they're not acting as if God is real. They believe God is real. And in fact, this is...
No, they know God is real. Knowing is different than belief. Knowing is different than belief.
James's critique of Kant's theory of religion from the second critique, the critique of practical reason in this book. He says the problem with the Kantian view of religion and religious faith
is a hole that you go inside a house, a door, if it doesn't have a barrier that you put there? Or is it a movable barrier? when the door is open, does it cease being a door? Or when the door is closed, does it become a wall?
Is that Kant uses the language of the as if.
If you break through a wall, is it no longer a wall? Even if it's still standing.
And James says that's a really uncouth, that's the term that he uses for criticizing Kant. That's a really uncouth way of understanding religious belief because it minimizes and trivializes the true belief of the religious subject in whatever it is that they consider the divine. And so,
again, Christianity, classical Christianity outside of Protestantism, is consensus basis. It's the entire church agreeing on what the truth is. It's the body of the church agreeing and then ejecting out that which they do not agree with as heresy. There's consensus, there's unity. That's why the church fathers are so important. That's why catechisms are important. Dogmatic rules.
So the sense of reality.
That's not presuppositionalism either, because presuppositionalism is different. Presuppositionalism is saying that this has to be true because we believe it's true to begin with. What dogmatic thinking is saying is that we've decided what the truth is based on the facts and our understanding of the facts. And therefore, to keep proper truth, keep proper faith, it should be interpreted through this lens. It's interpretive lens versus pre-analytical pre-analytical assent. It's lens versus pre-analytical consent. And what this philosopher is saying is both of those are wrong. It's individualistic experience.
Doesn't lead us to act as if things are real. It makes things real for us. And that's the origin of the many varieties of religious experiences for James.
So the fun thing with the serpent is, how does a serpent talk?
Okay, we're going to go a little bit longer, and then we're going to call it a night. Okay.
The Messiah would be born in Micah 5:2, exactly how the Messiah would suffer and die, Isaiah 53, and also down to the precise time.
I mean, it could be the fact that they weren't thinking about Jesus when they wrote it. That could probably be why they don't agree with us. Okay, that was easy. Let's move on. See what's next. Ooh, this one looks interesting. What is this one?
Why that is? Here's why.
Okay, so this might be interesting because Dan McKellen had a different take on it. We'll do about maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes on this, and then we'll call it a night.
Reshith, that's the word we translate beginning.
Translate the very first word of the Bible, Bereshit. Is it when God began to create? In the beginning, God created. And how does this change the discussion of the origins debate and how we interpret the Bible? How are you doing today, Max?
Doing great. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Pleasure
All right.
here.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking with you and chat with you, and I'm excited to see how this goes. So you're back.
So Dan McKellen made a big deal about this just a few days ago. So let's see.
Grounds. What is your experience in Hebrew and all that kind of stuff?
All right. In his Bible, which is Christian Bible, but specifically nerding out as much as I can. And yeah, it just really interests me. So, and this grew for 3 years, finished and so that's the only credential I can offer of dipped my toes.
Here, it's not simply because I appreciate your ideas, but we've been kind of diving into this back and forth and like discussing different arguments for it. And I just wanted to get your ideas out to the public. But for people not familiar with like my knowledge and stuff like that, I've taken 4 classes and trying to talk to everybody I can on audience, people not familiar with this topic, could just 1-1 as well as their implications. Like what is the
multiple options for understanding the first verse?
So I've read the Jewish translation of this, which is when God was creating. I've read the Christian, when God created. I've read there's 2 other ones that I've read. I pretty have every single major translation of both into English of the Hebrew, the Aramaic, the Greek, and I think the French also, and the Latin. So I have all the major translations into English from those original languages and from the sense of the theology. I do like the Jewish version, I'm not going to lie. And even though they're translating the same words, they translate them very differently, and the intention and implication is very different.
Verse of the Bible. I didn't know that for a long while in the church. And I know a lot of people aren't familiar that it's ironic, but the first word of the Bible is debated, and we're actually not completely sure how to translate it.
And that's important to note. Dan McKellen makes a slightly false claim by saying, well, we've all decided that that's a bad translation. That's not true. It's an open debate. It's all about preference, translator preference and reader preference.
So yeah, there are uncertainties. And
try and translate a joke. Try and translate a joke if you don't understand what we're talking about. It's a lot harder than you think.
So our translations are doing interpretive work for us. Unfortunately, they've all really only represented one view. And so that's sort of why it hasn't come on to a lot of people's radars. But yeah, there's roughly 2 options, 2 very common, it's like 2 camps, basically, you can say in this discussion as for understanding the first verse of the Bible. And I'll start with the simplest way I can think of to explain it, and then we'll move on a little bit.
Come on,
talk a little bit more about grammar.
Come on,
but
get into it.
So we can view Genesis 1:1 in 2 halves. There's the first word or phrase in the beginning, or in Hebrew it's ba, that's the preposition in. Reshith, that's the word we translate beginning. There's that, and then there's the second half, which is the rest of the verse. There's God, there's the event of him creating the heaven and the earth. And so here's the 2 options. The first half can modify the second half, or the second half could modify the first half. And so what I mean by that is that when we look at the word beginning, you need to ask what kind of beginning, right?
Right.
And in English, it's obvious, right? Like our translations give it to us in the beginning. But again, that's option 1. That's where the first word specifies when the event takes place. And so there's the event in the second half. There's God, the subject, creating the object, heaven and earth.
But all that does is push back.
That happens when? In the beginning. Okay, that's option 1. You have the first word providing a time setting for the second half. But you can also go the other way around, and this would be option 2, where you have the second half of the verse specifying when the beginning is, or what beginning we're talking about. And so look at the beginning, and you ask yourself, which beginning? Right? Because assuming there's no...
So he messed that up the way that he was explaining it, because he got a little word stuttery. So the first option is when. The second option is what. So in the beginning, time. When God began, after time already exists. In the beginning, time is being created as well. When God began, time already exists.
The in English, just
so it's when our story begins, not when the universe's story begins, or not when. Yeah, that's a good right there.
Looking at the Hebrew, there's no so you have to ask yourself, what kind of beginning? And so the second option says, well, it's when God created the heaven and the earth. So I hope that puts it
So our beginning or the beginning of everything.
into somewhat simpler terms, because I know looking at it without a knowledge of Hebrew,
Our reality or the
you think,
beginning
well,
of all reality.
how could you put it another way? Well, it's just vague. There's just there's less to it than the English translations we typically read make it out to be. And so because it's a little bit more vague, you could have something like option 1, in the beginning. That's when God created the heaven and the earth. But in this less common option,
in the Jewish option,
you figure out which beginning it is. And that's the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, so that's the simplest way I can think of putting it. But when we talk about like why that is, here's why.
In the beginning versus when God began.
Basically, the question is whether the first verse of the Bible is an independent sentence or a dependent sentence. And so those are technical words, but they're pretty simple. Like, is the sentence a complete thought, right? Is it a sentence? Is the verse 1 a sentence, or is it half a sentence? And it like continues on into verse 2 or verse 3 or something like that. And so in option 1, which is our traditional interpretation, which we read in most of our translations, it's...
So when we think of nothing, we can't even think of gravity. We can't even think of the precursors for matter. There can be no gravity, there can be no math, there can be no rules. Absolute nothing, creation from nothing, means there is no time, there is no gravity, there is no chemicals, there is no anything, no heat, no cold, there's nothing. Nothing is actually nothing. There's not even color, so there's not a black void or a white existence. There's nothing. There's actual nothing. Or, when God began, time already exists. Rules and mathematics already existed when our reality was being created.
It's a independent sentence. So it stands alone and it represents an event. Like, this is, I'm telling you, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, and then there's options.
Now, this is a little bit of a silly argument if you consider the fact that this was all written after the exile, after other scripture had already existed. So it's belaboring the point in a way. But for those who take the Bible as literal or hyper literal, this is an extremely important thing to argue about.
Option 2, where you look at in beginning, and we assume that the second part of the sentence is telling us which beginning.
3 more minutes, guys.
Right, because we don't know which beginning. And so that results in a dependent sentence. So the NRSV illustrates this. They interpret the sentence to be specifying when the beginning was. So in the beginning, which beginning are we talking about? We're talking about the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth. But that's not a complete thought. Like, you need an event. In the beginning, God, what did he do?
So the question becomes, did other realities exist before our reality exists? Or is this talking about the beginning of our reality? Or is this just talking about our little perspective of what reality is? What beginning? Our beginning, the universe's beginning, everything's beginning. These are the things to ask. Was there a universe before us? Could there have been many universes before us, and this is just the beginning of this particular universe?
Well, as our NRSV has it,
are there many realities, and this is just the beginning of this reality?
It's verse 3. And God's
reality already exists, and this is just the beginning of our existence. And the precursor to our existence, which is the matter and energy taken and needed for us to exist, which can never be created or destroyed. So that first creation of those things is still us, because we are that matter that originally existed.
Said, let there be light, right? So that would be the event in the sentence, and verse 1 would just be like a time. The whole sentence, the whole actually verse would be the time setting for that event.
Okay, so that's going to be it for tonight, y'all. I love you all. We're going to go ahead and do the outro music. Let's give me a second. So if you all have been enjoying the show, please like, please subscribe, please share. I know this one wasn't as fiery as last time, but we'll get into more exciting stuff next week. Like I said, I want to do Dat Darling. I think her name's Regina Rose. I want to do Dat Darn Kitten, or Kitty. I want to do Eva Lupine. So I want to cover some more controversial stuff. And I think next week, if we have time, we're going to start Buddhism. So last week we did Taoism. This coming week, I think we're going to start touching on Buddhism. So thank you all. Have a great night. And see you all tomorrow for an open room. Tequila. I hope that's not copyrighted. Darn it.
Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps I take from my bed to the floor. 5, 6, 7, 8. Will today be rough or will today be great? 9, 10, 11, 12. Lately I've been going through hell. 13, 14, 15, 16. Today's the day. Are you coming? Are you sick of being normal? I'm sick of being average. I'm sick of being mortal. I'm about to be a savage. I see a lot of things that I want. I will have them. I got a new mindset that I just established. I'll march through the cold with the nails on the pavement. I'll shovel that coal just to get out